This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg. Phil is the author of American Veda. He's also the author of The Life of Yogananda. We are now not only a podcast, but a YouTube channel, so you can watch us. And whether you're watching or listening, please hit the subscribe button. Also want to take a second to thank the people that have contributed to help keep us on the air. And if there are other people that would like to do that, please go to spiritmatterstalk.com and it will be explained to you how to do that. And we have about 300 shows in our archives, which are available to everyone anywhere. And I think you'll enjoy those. We have a wonderful show today. I should mention, it's the 75th anniversary of the book, Autobiography of a Yoga by Yogananda, that came out and has changed the lives of many, 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 many people worldwide. Certainly many people I know, lives have been profoundly changed by that book. So if you haven't read it, read it. If you've read it, read it again, because there's always more to get from it. We're fortunate today to have on our show Brahmachari Martin. He's he's with the Self-Realization Fellowship as a minister and a spiritual counselor for over 40 years. Thank you so very much, Brahmachari Martin, for coming and taking the time to be on with us today.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here, Dennis. Philip.
So this is a special show. We want to honor and celebrate the 75th anniversary of Autobiography of a Yogi. And we're delighted that we have a representative of the Self-Realization Fellowship with us. This is the copy that I read in 1970.
Wow.
And I still have it with me, even though I've moved many times over the years. It was a $5 hardcover, and I would not have had $5, so I'm sure I ripped it off from somebody, or borrowed it from somebody and never returned it. And it had a big influence on my life, as it has millions of others. So, Brother Martin, to begin, you've been a monk for 40 years with SRF, but tell us about the first time you read Autobiography of a Yogi and what were the circumstances?
Okay, it was also in 1970. Same year, dude. I was in Los Angeles. Were you up north?
No, I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts at the time.
Oh, okay. So anyway, yeah, 1970, I was 19 years old. I grew up in Orange County, California. Typical growing up in that era, 60s, exciting time. I didn't have any kind of spiritual leanings, except I had this strong thought from about 16 years old, 17, it started, it said, you have to meditate. You have to meditate. I didn't know anything about meditation, but that was that thought. And it's like, this is going to be an important part of your life. So I knew I would have to meditate at some point. So then I went to school, I went to college at USC and joined a fraternity. And the fraternity brother, he was reading all these spiritual books. That was what was happening. At the campus, we had speakers every noon. Ramdas, Krishnamurti, Vishnu Devananda, Hatha Yoga. It was incredibly fertile time for spiritual exploration. And I met this fraternity brother who was doing that. He was reading book after book. He said, you got to do this. This is incredible. And so we were doing it. And it was like we were looking for like the most powerful yogi. Who is the most realized master? That was our search, because we kind of knew we would follow whoever this person was. And so we were reading book after book. And finally he said, oh, I found it. Our search is over. It's Paramahansa Yogananda, Autobiography of a Yogi. And he said, not only is he the most greatest realized saint, but his guru, Sri Teshwar, is greater than him. And he has a guru, Larry Mahashai, who's even like more amazing. And Larry Mahashai has a guru of Babaji that is beyond human conception. So we found the most powerful. So I read it and I was indeed swept away by the book. I thought everything he says is true, that there's a voice. He was like speaking to me as his closest friend. It was, you know, you read this again and again in the Amazon reviews. And so a few days later, my friend was in the bookstore, UFC bookstore, and this random person comes up to him, starts talking to him about self-realization fellowship. Says, you got to go to self-realization fellowship meeting. There's a Hollywood Temple is like 2 miles up the street, and you can, tonight there's a service. And this is the teaching of Paramahansa Yogananda. And that got my friend, who was what? Because we didn't even know, that book that you have, Philip, if you look through it, it really doesn't promote self-realization fellowship very strongly. And we didn't know that Yogananda had an organization. So this was great news. And so we went up Thursday to that service, and it was, I felt like this is it. I found my path of meditation, which, that voice was telling me. And then the next Saturday, I went to the international headquarters, which again was only 2 or 3 miles away. So I was just really ended up at the perfect spot. Even as a child, I knew, I was like, oh, good, I ended up in LA. For some reason, I knew this was important. So I went to the Lake Shrine, I went to Mount Washington, enrolled for the teachings. And then a couple of years later, I began typesetting for the monks, for the SRF, with the monks who were there working. And just being with them, and then suddenly I found myself a monk, a couple of years after that. So that's how it all happened.
And if I could ask, you are, for our listeners that aren't familiar with the term, a brahmachari, a monk, a celibate, a monastic, living, as I understand, with other monks, not living solo, but you have a community of monks wherever you are. And I'm certainly met a number, and you folks seem, I have to say, very happy. Sometimes people think of him as a monk as very solemn, and I'm sure you have that experience sometimes, but a very happy group. And for our people that are very innocent listening out there that maybe have had no experience going inward, what was when you first started, what was your experience? Did you feel a happiness, a calm? What was it that you got from meditation, and how did that influence in your life change or grow over time? That, obviously it must have been a big way because of the commitment you made for your lifestyle. And so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, that's a big question. Meditation was the main part of it. Like I said, I knew that was the center of it. Mm-hmm. And the meditation is going within, where that joy, that happiness, that missing link that because I was confused and miserable when I read Autobiography of Yogi, and then I started meditating, things began to clear up. But gradually you become happier and happier, and then it's the whole path of Raja Yoga, which starts with yama niyama, the do's and the don'ts, how to live in harmony with the laws of God. And so I was a boomer, a narcissistic baby boomer, only interested in me. I didn't have the faintest idea of service, of doing anything for anybody else, which makes you happy. And one of the great things about the community life or a married life is giving and doing for others. That's a huge part of yoga. And so I learned to do that. And then I'm learning to meditate. And yeah, all those things just made me happy, and make all of us happy that are practicing.
How did your family feel when you made the commitment to be a monk?
They were, my mother was fairly progressive, even though she was from New Zealand, and very conservative. would die if anyone called me Marty. My name is Martin. So she was very formal and serious. We went to church, ordinary church, regular Protestant church. But then of course, yeah, this was a strange thing. And of course, she was worried as a mother. But then as she saw me and how kind of balanced it was, and not really strange and not culty, she became, fine with it.
And did she ever read Autobiography of a Yogi?
I think so. I mean, she actually took the lessons, which are the core teachings. So she started those. And when it got to the first technique of these energization exercises, that was a little bit of more of a commitment that she was read, had the time for. So she was totally, she was very intuitive and spiritual. She had a sort of a psychic. When her sister's son died in New Zealand, she woke up that night and said, "Nikki's dead." She knew it. So she had this sort of, she understood how the spiritual connection and communion and the power of the mind and all these things. She healed my father when you know, medicine couldn't do anything, and she was at her wit's end, and she just healed him because there was no other alternative. So she was a powerful woman, so very understanding. My dad was fine with everything. He says, as long as you're happy.
Nice, wonderful. I have a question. I'll throw it actually out to both you, Brahmachari Martin, and to Phil. You know, Phil, like Brother Martin, you were very influenced by Autobiography of a Yoga. And again, I want to mention that
Yogi.
book, Autobiography of a Yogi. That book was written 75 years ago, but you went on, Phil, to write about the life of Yogananda, and I'm sure Brahmachari Martin, you've probably met a lot of monks that actually spend time with Yogananda, and for both of you, what beyond the book can you tell our listeners that you learned and experienced? Maybe starting with Brother Martin.
Well, beyond the book, it was the teachings of Kriya Yoga. Paramahansa mentions it in the book, and he says, I can't explain it because there's a certain preparatory period that you have to meditate with the other techniques. So it was the practice of meditation. And then, like I said, and everyone learns different. I think everyone is really vastly different. The spiritual path is so huge, and every one of us has our weakest link that we sort of have to take care of before we can go forward. And for me, being a baby boomer, again, it was almost like service. Emphasis less on the self, doing for others, thinking of others, and including that in your spiritual life. Because all the things about practicing the presence of God and meditation and all these, they're in the teachings. They're right. You get them right away. But at least for me, it was more of an expansion of interest in others.
Let me just follow up on that. A lot of times people, when they hear about a monastic person and living the lifestyle you're living, they think of somebody being very self-absorbed. And what you're saying, and this has been my experience, not only with your monks, but with many monks in general, so much of their life is focused on service to others. How in your monastic order is that expressed?
Well, we have our work. I'm a counselor, and others are in the kitchen, and others are in the garden, and others are working, and we're working for Yogananda, you know, because we've given our life for that. And so it makes it, and then when you meditate on top of that, your whole life becomes spiritualized. And so then you're not just meditating, and that your God time is not just, 5 in the morning and like 12 in the evening. It's throughout the day. And so everything we do, and that's why it's so balanced. And it's really in your heart. It's who are you working for? And the monastic is not the path for Yogananda, promoted. He promoted the householder path. And which I feel again, paradoxically, I'm more connected with other people than I was before I became a monk. And as a monk, the worst thing you can do is sort of be really too super inward, because then you get really weird and eccentric and unhappy. So the life just makes you more outward. But the main thing is in your heart. Who are you living for? You can be in a family, and you can be married, and you can work for God and live for God and live for Guru. And that's that's like being a total monk. And if you're a monk and you don't do that, you can be doing all the outward things. It's empty. So it really is, who you're living for. Are you living for God? It's not Guru necessarily, but God. And that's, Yogananda says that throughout the Autobiography of a Yogi. We're here. Purpose of life is to seek God. Purpose of life is to love God. How do you do that? Through meditation. But you have to do it.
Right. And Phil, and what did you discover in your writing, in your book, about
Well,
Yogananda that
when I read it the same year Brother Martin did, I did not become a student of Yogananda and certainly not a disciple. And I had my path, and my path was different. But what I discovered in all my research is that for every person who reads the Autobiography of a Yogi and then takes the lessons and becomes a devotee, there are probably 10 or 50 that read it and don't become students of Yogananda or disciples, but who are strongly influenced by the book and by his example anyway, and find their, their own paths, whatever they may be. And I was in that category. And when I was writing American Veda, of course, he was one of the 2 or 3 most important teachers who came from India that I profiled. And what I realized afterward is what an interesting life he had, independent of his stature as a spiritual teacher. And I wanted to write more about it, but there was no room, a book that was covering 200 years. So I had the idea to do a biography, and now I'm going to lead to a question for Brother Martin. One of the reasons I wrote a biography of Yogananda was I realized how much he left out of Autobiography of a Yogi. I actually did a page count and realized that less than 10% of the book covered his life after he left India and came to America. And there were big patches of that time that were not in the book. So I thought, well, somebody should fill in those gaps. So I want to ask Brother Martin, the fact that he left out so much about his life has led some people to say, why does he call it an autobiography? He left out so much, and so much of the book is about other people, all these great yogis and Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore and all these, Luther Burbank. So do you run into those kind of questions when people talk to you about Autobiography of a Yogi? And what was it like for you to discover the aspects of his life that were not in the book?
Yeah, that's always interesting to me. I don't know why he followed, an autobiography, you can sort of take whatever path you want to take as a writer. But when this podcast interview invitation came, I realized I hadn't read Autobiography of a Yogi cover to cover in a long time. So I got, this is a good chance. So I went to our monk's library, and some other monks must have had this, because I wanted to read a hardcover. I have it on Kindle, but I wanted a hardcover. So I went to the monk's library, and there were no copies of Autobiography of a Yogi there. There was just this book. The only book that's there is, some other monks must have had the same idea, but the only book that was there was Life of Yogananda by Phil Goldberg. So I took that off the shelf.
I'm honored.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great book. You're a great writer, I must say.
Thank you.
I'm a reader of many biographies and Pulitzer Prize winning books and whatever, and most of the writing is dead. And your writing is lively. And
thank you.
You take huge amounts of information and condense it into like a paragraph, which is really brilliant. But anyway, so I was reading them in parallel, which was really fun, and seeing the gaps that Yogananda in his life and learning about these things. And I've learned about these things over time. Yeah. I haven't been asked about them. I don't particularly know. You would have to ask Yogananda if he was here, why he focused on this and that. But so one thing I was thinking was, like the book is magical. There's a magic to it. And there's sort of a magic, and I've never been to India, but I've been to Dominican Republic, which is called the India of the West, surprisingly. And I went there and I didn't want to leave. It was just, people were just fishing on the beach, and it was just a whole different consciousness than America. And I suppose India is that in spades, and it was like magical place. And of course, Yogananda writes about, all the magic that's happening. Maybe when he comes to America, there's no magic here. It's just a different place. You write about, you write about what you did in your business day, or your goals or whatever, and they're kind of dry. And I'm sure Yogananda could have written a book, you know, in America and would have made it as amazing as the rest. But I don't get a lot of questions about that, but I've been filling in the gaps and enjoying it. And you know,
and now I have to go to I've been to India 6 times. Now I have to go to the Dominican Republic.
It's very nice.
Well, Yogananda did say LA was the Benares of the West, so he must have found some charm here.
I think there's something, it's very deep beneath, you know, all the other stuff in the world. But most of all this is very, you know, it's very deep what he's talking about America. And I see it when I go around the country and I visit different places and I thought, oh, this is so much better than LA, so much better than LA and beautiful. But anyway, when I talk to people, people in America are so nice. They're so kind. They really are generally, you know, the thing you get in the news, in the media is just, to me, is not representative. When you talk to the rank and file of people in this country, I think they're very kind and very inspired. And in Yogananda's last page of Autobiography of Yogi, he said the deep spirituality, I can't remember the phrase, but this deep spirituality of America. And I think he saw deeper than even all the troubles that we have now and the world has now. And so I've always been an optimist in terms of, you know, how the world is going to go. And it's been proven right, because people were always, when I was in 1978, and I go, oh my God, we're not, you know, this world is not going to survive this year, you know, and it's a constant thought. And I got, well, I guess I'll let go of that thought, because things are going to continue, but people are learning, and I don't know.
I wanted to mention one thing about the influence of Autobiography of a Yogi, because I started, I've been involved with transcendental meditation for 50 years. I started in 1970. And I remember when I started, spirituality was very new to me. And when I asked people how they started TM, more than anything else, they said they read Autobiography of a Yogi. It got them on a path. And probably people in yoga, every, you know, spiritual path that's out there, I think that Autobiography of a Yogi got a lot of people going in that direction. So the influence, when I say it's influenced thousands of, maybe all the people that are involved with SRF, but it's actually much more than that. There's probably people that got back to their more fundamental spiritual, mystical Christian roots and Judaic roots as a result of the book. So its influence is just tremendous. And like I said before, if you haven't read it, please read it, and it's readily available. And also read Phil's book on Yogananda. It's, you know, you'll be not wasting your time. You'll be making good use of your time in both cases.
I want to reinforce what you said, because when I wrote American Veda, I interviewed more than 300 people, and I would ask how they got involved in yogic teachings, Indian philosophy, and all that. If they mentioned a book, far and away, the most often mentioned book was Autobiography of a Yogi. The second most mentioned, because I tended to interview baby boomers mostly, was Ram Dass's Be Here Now. But when I interviewed Ram Dass, he mentioned Autobiography of a Yogi. So you're quite right about that. And I would say millions, not thousands.
Yeah. And it's come up. Yeah.
When I was in design department, we were designing these little books for the public, general public, which we have like 3 of them. And they said, let's get a book cover that's done by a designer rather than in-house, book cover design. So I went to the bookstores to look for designs that I liked. And on the back flap, you'll see the name of the designer. So I was writing down the names of designers that I liked in the book covers, went home, went back, and I called them, cold called them. Say, you know, we have this job, I'm from Self-Realization Fellowship. And almost everyone said, oh, Autobiography of Yogi, that changed my life. Autobiography of Yogi, he was one Christian designer, had the God Talks with Second Coming, which is this very, very deep, big book on Christian interpretation by Yogananda. He has it by, he reads it before he designs his Christian book covers. And and finally we found a lady who wasn't, the one we chose didn't know Self-Realization Fellowship. And then when we went up to see her in San Francisco, she had the Law of Success on her desk and didn't even know that it was by Yogananda. So yeah, it's the influence is huge.
I also wanted to ask you, have you found in your 40 years plus of being involved, or maybe first reading the book, that, and I'm going to guess you've read it or gone through parts of it again and again over the years. Did you see the development of your own consciousness, because when you read it subsequent times to the first time, that you had deeper understanding, deeper meaning, you related to it? It's almost a way for people to check their spiritual progress, to read and reread a book like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I hadn't read the book in a long time, cover to cover. I mean, I'll get in trouble if I tell you how many years it's been since I read it. So it had been a long time. I read it cover to cover, and I started saying, oh my God, that's my life. This, anyway, I wrote 80 things down. I counted them, 80 things down that were new perceptions that I got in the book, and really inspiring things about had sort of become part of my life, which were like, oh, good, because I wanted the main, as a student, as a disciple of Yogananda, what I really want is to, reflect those ideals. And I found them sort of hidden in the book, and I was writing like tons of them. So yeah, it was, and then I put the book down, and I felt Yogananda's presence this whole time I was reading it, in an even stronger way than I had in a long time. So it was a great experience.
And I would second Dennis's recommendation to our listeners and viewers. If you read the Autobiography of Yogi a long time ago, give it a reread. Because I had to for I was doing research, so I did. And I also listened, by the way, there's an audio version narrated by Ben Kingsley. I've listened to that. Yeah, so that's also an option. Because, we grow spiritually, we grow and mature, and so we find new things in it. We're capable of extracting more from a book like that than we were in the past. One of the things that often comes up when I mention Yogananda and the Autobiography, people want to talk about the miracles, all the examples of yogic superpowers, as we call, siddhis, as we say, and the many miracles and wonders that he writes about in the book. And I'm curious, Brother Martin, how people that you come in contact with respond to that. Because in my experience, there are people who love that stuff, and that's part of the main appeal for them. And there's other people who say, well, I don't believe any of it. I just love the book for other reasons. So what is your experience?
I loved it. When I started, I was like totally captivated by the whole thing, by miracles, which is kind of a superficial understanding of spirituality, as you realize when you get into it. But Paramahansaji, in his beginning, he said, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. He quotes that from Christ. And so this was sort of show that there were these, the only reason I started spirituality was to see, because I realized that there was a world behind this world, of different laws, of subtler worlds and subtler. And so Yogananda sort of is bringing that out, said, look, there's a hidden world of electricity behind this. And those that meditate and develop the ability can manipulate that and create miracles, which really aren't miracles but they're the workings of laws. But then as you read when you read it, you'll see it, there's a deeper attitude, because a lot of times Yogananda will talk about a miracle and then he'll say, that was bad, this is it's not helpful.
Right.
So, and then if you go on and if you get the self-realization fellowship lessons, the teachings after the book, then that's very sobering. You realize very quickly it's not about miracles, and the miracles don't come as you practice. And there can be a little bit of a disconnect. You're kind of going, wait a minute, what happened? Aren't I, how come I'm not going into the astral world or this and that? And that understanding has to come. But I think Yogananda had to bring this out in order to really, he didn't want to bring a church, a religion, like, believe in this and that. He said, this is based on a science of a world behind this physical world. And then we were really looking for that as in my generation. We couldn't, this world get out, let's leave everything, drop everything. And what, as Yogananda said, what greater escape is than going into omnipresence? And that was what is offered in meditation. And omnipresence, not miracles, it's spirit. It's the subtler things: peace, love, divine joy. These are the qualities of God which you look for in meditation. And if people have other things, you kind of say, don't worry about that.
And I want to reinforce what you said before about Yogananda teaching primarily to householders. He created a monastic order, and that was a pretty new thing in the 1920s and 1930s for Americans to have that style of, swamis and females in monastics as well. So he was very innovative in that regard. But he was teaching for people in the world, and his own example was of a monk in the world. He worked very hard, and he overcame a lot of obstacles. One of the things that stood out for me in researching his life was, he was here in the 1920s and the Great Depression, the World War II years. He was a dark-skinned Hindu in a very racist country when he first arrived. So he had to deal with a lot of stuff. He was not, just sitting in a cell or a cave like, sannyasis in India. So that it stands out for me, and I'm sure it does for you as well.
Absolutely. And the way Yogananda was, he was positive, forgiving. It was on to the next thing. He didn't hold on to hurts or whatever. And so he would hardly even talk about things that were negative. And so then the disciples he taught sort of emulated that. It was just keep on the positive, forgive those and move on. Doesn't mean you're a doormat or anything. But so for a long time, we didn't know about some of the really tough times that Yogananda went through. In fact, when we did one documentary of interviewing devotees who knew Yogananda, it's called, I can't remember the name of it, but it's something we show members. I mean, it was like one testimonial of a person that knew Yogananda after another, and it was just it was so moving because you could see how he affected them and what an incredible person he was. But the filmmaker that did that, so he said there's no conflict here. You have no movie because the hero has to go through difficulties. Yogananda never went through any difficulties, and we go, yeah, I guess not too bad. And then because it really wasn't. It wasn't brought out. And then when Awake came and Philip's book, and then more was revealed about how difficult the guru had it. And then you realize, oh, he was even greater than we thought. I mean, it's even more amazing. That's what you want. You want to overcome difficulties and not have smooth sailing. And he certainly didn't. And as an example for everybody. And because and that's a big thing in my counseling. People will call and say, my life is turning upside down. Yoga must not work. And say, no, it works perfectly. It's just, you'll just get better at dealing with it. But the world is inherently difficult,
Right.
Like Annie Lamont said, I just saw a quote, she said, life is ridiculously difficult. and and you can, when you say that, you can smile because you accept that, and then you go from there. And yoga is the greatest therapy to get through the
Mm.
ridiculous difficulty of life.
Very good.
Brahmachari Martin, I had one final question from my side for you, and that is, how does the Self-Realization Fellowship plan on celebrating or commemorating the 75th anniversary of the publishing of Autobiography of a Yogi?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. There's a new edition of the Autobiography of a Yogi deluxe book in slipcase, gold pages, end pages, and 100 photographs within
Wow.
duotones and color, and this kind of this acid paper that will like last forever. It's really, really nice. Anyway, we've come out with that as our as one of our main things, and then we have podcasts like we're doing like today, and different outreach. So that's what we are doing. And this book can be available. We have a website. If you're interested in following up on anything, it's yogananda-srf.org.
We'll post all of that up, including the availability of that book. And what a great gift.
Yes, a deluxe edition, which raises another quick question for you, Brother Martin. SRF, the original publisher, sold the rights to SRF a few years after the book was published, and SRF has published it ever since. And there have been revisions, updates from time to time. And people have often asked me why and what are they about. Can you explain?
Yeah. Of course, Yogananda he lived 6 years longer than Autobiography of a Yogi. So as the time passed after publishing, he came up with revisions and even a final chapter. The book was published in a small publishing house in New York. The Taramata, who was the editor, she wore her shoes out walking to all the publishing houses to try to find a book about miracles and yogis that published in 1945. So they finally found a publisher, and they had the rights for a while, and while that was going on, you couldn't like change a comma in there without changing the whole plate. So it was very expensive. So the corrections that Yogananda had, the additions and whatever, had to be apportioned, over time. And then we got the plates, and we were able to do more. And then it became like a manpower issue where we didn't have a lot of monks in our editorial department. And so we were working, through the years, and finally got all the revisions done that Yogananda, earmarked for us in the 1957 edition.
And since then, I think you've added some footnotes and photographs to subsequent editions as well.
Yeah, there will be footnotes, and any footnote that we add, it'll always say publisher's note. So you always know that the footnotes, because Yogananda annotated it extensively. So all the footnotes he put in, if they have no publisher's note on it, it's from him. So yeah, there'll be stuff put in as times change and things come up.
Yeah, there's one very long footnote of his that I always was drawn to, because India attained its independence a year after the book was published. And in a subsequent edition, he added a long footnote, a great tribute to India and its independence. It was his beloved homeland, and he was happy to have lived to see the independence.
Yeah, and then the Lake Shrine has the Gandhi Memorial. The ashes of Gandhi were part of them, were sent to him, and they're interred here.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Brother Martin is stationed, so to speak, at the Lake Shrine in Pacific Palisades section of Los Angeles. It's a local oasis, a national treasure. And I hope listeners, if you get to LA, pay a visit to the Self-Realization Fellowship's Lake Shrine. It's a beautifully maintained and sacred place.
A place of great peace, and certainly you don't have to be tremendously alert to feel the influence and consciousness of Yogananda there. It's very alive and very inspiring, and a very lively but quiet feeling.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. It's just it just overtakes you with the peace of the place. And yeah, absolutely. If you're in Los Angeles, look it up.
And we're excuse me, we're recording this toward the end of 2021. So by the time you listeners get to LA, pandemic should have lightened up a lot more, and the Lake Shrine will be opened more and more. I know there's some restrictions at the moment.
Yeah, there's a reservation system, and it's really simple to do. If you just find the website and reserve on it, and that may continue, because it's a very nice thing, because then it shows sort of shows people what introduces people to the lake in that way. So so go to the website first.
Thank you so very much. That was wonderful. And
Thank
again,
you,
hold up your old copy of Autobiography of a Yogi, Phil.
1970.
Yeah, that's the one.
And your book behind you?
My book is this one.
Oh, my book here?
And Philip's
That's
book.
the
Life of Yogananda, the biography.
Great.
Yeah.
Two great reads. Go for it. Thank you so very much, Brahmachari Martin. Wonderful.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Philip. Really enjoyed it.
Take good care. Be well.
You too.
Phil, that was Brahmachari Martin from the Self-Realization Fellowship, SRF, the original organization with Yogananda, for Yogananda, to spread his teaching. Met many of the monks over the years, very nice fellows, very committed to what they're doing. And it was timely we did this interview, because I think we taped it, we're taping it now, it's November 2021. Aren't you giving a course in the next couple of months on Yogi or Yogananda?
I've been asked to do a number of interviews and talks about because of the 75th anniversary. And so I'm teaching a course, a 10-week course, starting sometime mid-January for the winter semester for Hindu University of America. So it's 10 weeks, and we'll go through, give or take, 50 pages of the Autobiography of a Yogi each week, and go into depth, and I'll bring in everything I know that I've learned from writing about Yogananda that's not in the book. So
And that's all posted up.
people should go to hua.edu.
All right, we'll post that up.
hua.edu and look for the course, winter semester.
And while we're on, making an announcement or two, if you're watching or listening, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, and we'd appreciate it if you do that. This book, Autobiography of a Yogi, I'm going to think many, or if not most, of the people listening in have heard of it. If you haven't, it's a very profound book, and it's been an introduction to spirituality to many people, and not just those on the path laid out by Yogananda, but by many, many teachers. And as I said, I first got involved with transcendental meditation. So many of the people I met became interested because of Autobiography of a Yogi. So really an amazing book, and 75 years. Wow. 75
years. So it is amazing. And, he knew it would be a key, if not the key, to keeping his legacy alive after he died. He said, this will represent me in so many words, into the future. And he was right. And, as I said in the interview with Brother Martin, all the interviews I've done for American Veda and other books, it always comes up. It comes up more often than any other book. And one of the interesting things about that is I would hear all the time, how did, what changed you spiritually? What turned you to these kind of yoga teachings and all that? And it would be things like, well, I had a roommate and he had this book with, this guy on the cover. And so I picked it up and it was, or somebody
Right.
gave it to me, somebody
Yeah.
loaned it to me.
And also, Brother Martin mentions he's got involved in all this in 1970, which is when I got involved in TM in 1970. You got involved 2 or 3 years before that, but read the book in 1970, so a profound year. But it was at that time, even amongst people in the counterculture, but certainly everyone in the mainstream, if you mentioned meditation, it was still something very far out and unusual. These days, think of the enormous progress in regard to the acceptance and understanding of meditation that has taken place in the last 40, 50 years. And in your book, American Veda, you get into a lot of that. As a matter of fact, I think you should write an additional few chapters and have a new and re-release it, because since you've written the book, a lot has happened in regard to that.
It's true. And when I lecture about it or teach about it, I always sort of try to bring it up to date. But it's been, 11 years almost 12 since it came out. And a lot has changed, but, it would be worth, an add-on chapter. It's still in print, it's still selling. So, it's not like I have to revive the whole thing. But you're right. And you know how I got this book? George Harrison gave it to me.
No, tell us the story.
No, I'm kidding.
No,
but
yeah.
I mentioned
I know. Yeah.
I mention it because he used to keep stacks of it around to give to people.
Right.
This is one of the books that changed George's life.
Right. And yeah.
And that led to the Beatles, going to see Maharishi in 1967 and ending up in India. So he was one of but he would go visit SRF when he was in LA, and he considered himself,
he's influenced a lot of people. I mean, he's gotten a lot of people on a spiritual path. Somebody just sent me an interview, a great interview for us with one of the members of Moody Blues, and he mentioned starting TM 50 years ago, and he still was involved, and 3 of the other guys started, and they started at a house that was, George Harrison was paying the rent for, and he was the one who told him about it. So he helped people from various.
In fact, Paul McCartney has a book out now, 2-volume book about his lyrics, and he was interviewed just the other day. And here it is, all these years later, they asked about meditation and going to India, and all that stuff. That had a huge impact, and it made Maharishi Mahesh Yogi world famous. But as we said with Brother Martin, Yogananda laid the groundwork for a lot of the teachers like Maharishi who came in.
What year did he come? Was it like 27, 31, something?
No, the book.
Yogananda come to the United States.
1920.
Wow. So you think about, and by the way, let's mention your book on Yogananda. I think I see it behind you there. The
Life of Yogananda. Yes.
Yeah. If you're at all interested in this interview that took place today, and I'm sure you are, and you haven't read either of those books, you should read them and even reread, like Autobiography of a Yogi. There were certain books like that. Maharishi wrote a commentary on the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita that I've read a number of times over the years. It's been several years since I've read it again, but I always got a totally different perspective on it, which made me feel like my practice of meditation was having an effect on how I could understand such things. So, and Brother Martin mentioned the same thing, and I'm sure.
And it's a 500-page book, and I've asked myself many times, why is this so popular? Because it's not just a life story. Right. As we mentioned, the actual autobiographical parts of the book are much less than people realize, because he goes into, a whole lot of stuff. So it was an introduction to yoga philosophy and, the whole fullness of Indian philosophies and the tradition, Vedic tradition, because he finds ways of bringing that in. It's about supernormal powers and miracles. It's about life in India at a certain period of time. It's about a lot of things. So it's very easy to read it and be enchanted by something, and then realize if you reread it 20 years, 30 years later, you don't even remember that you read it.
That was my experience. I actually listened to Ben, I think it was Ben Kingsbury on Books on Tape. But again, I think that he speaks with great confidence and self-assuredness and simplicity about very profound stuff, about a much bigger world than probably we ever thought existed.
Yeah.
And it was very convincing. It was very believable because of how he articulated it and its simplicity and the confidence with which he presented it. And you read it and you think, bring it on. Where was I? How do I get there? And so I think that he had a tremendous skill in that area, and he left a very solid organization behind.
Yeah.
And I mentioned in the interview when that I had been to a number of their facilities, and it's a very profound feeling. Is a silence, but not a dead silence. It's a very lively, enlightened, silence of consciousness, and Yogananda consciousness really be permeating those facilities. So if you have a chance,
and they're all beautiful. They're all beautiful, beautiful locations and beautifully maintained. I always joke that Yogananda had the best real estate karma of all the teachers who came here, and it's
those were the days when you could buy something along the coast of California.
Well, some of the SRF properties, I'm sure developers would love to get their hands on.
Right.
But
well, that was a wonderful interview, and an area that you are quite expert in. And so, we'll have the information about Phil's course up, that's coming up in January. And then I would guess that in the future, whatever course you give will be online somewhere. And
this is online. It's hua.edu.
Oh, so then they could take it in January, but then, okay.
Yeah, it's by Zoom.
Zoom is here.
So geography is no limitation in this.
Right. All right. Till next time.
Okay.
Hit that subscribe button, please.
What? Oh, yes. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the contribute button. Hit all the buttons.
We're there.